You arrive in a dark, foreboding place. There's a shaft of light flooding through an old wooden door at the far end of the room. Beyond it, you can hear the strains of the theme tune to the Failing Writers podcast. Do you bravely go through the door, or do you turn round and go and put the kettle on instead? Right, look, love, we're not going to get anywhere if you just choose the kettle every time, are we? I know, a nice cup of tea and a biscuit and all that. But for this to work, you just need to pretend that you actually enjoy listening to the Failing Writers podcast and choose the mysterious door, please. Thank you. Right, shaft of light, door, theme tune. And you choose to go through the door. Welcome to the Failing Writers podcast, Ergodic Fiction Special.
Here's a question for you.
You know, this time,
What?
I'm going to say yes, I have. Though I hadn't until we started looking at it for this podcast.
I haven't asked you yet. What do you mean this time you're going to say yes?
I feel like last time I said no, but I realised that wasn't quite right. So I've gone back and I'm saying yes.
What?
Yeah, well, I've gone right back to the start of the podcast, back to page 1,
Right.
where we were before. And I'm going to say yes to your question this
Which
time.
I haven't asked yet.
Yet, exactly, on this run-through.
I'm very confused, Tom. And what question was that?
You were going to ask me if I'd ever come across ergodic fiction before.
Well, actually, yeah, that was what I was going to ask you. Which,
I know.
okay.
And the first time I said no, because until we started talking about this episode, I didn't think I had. I'd, literally never heard of it. But it turns out I had actually read a decent amount of it when I was younger,
All right.
in the form of choose-your-own-adventure books.
Oh, I used to love them.
Yeah?
They were great. I've still got a bunch of them on my shelf.
Yeah, the artwork, everything about them is just proper nostalgia, isn't it? It's great stuff.
It is. It's iconic.
Yeah. But we'll get back to that later, that whole subject of those books. Or I guess listeners can probably go straight there by turning to page 47 now. But why don't you tell us what it was that made us decide to do an episode on ergodic fiction in the first place?
Right, yes. Well, I have to say, yeah, like you, Tom, I don't think I really knew much about it until maybe a year ago when some friends of mine bought me a book called S, which I know you've perused, Tommy.
I have, and it's one heck of a bit of work, isn't it? It's amazing.
It really is, yeah. Well, I'll describe it in a bit more detail in a moment. But yeah, anyway, after reading that book, I went online to learn more about it, like you do, and I found this term ergodic for this form of literature. And then, like you do, I started going down a little bit of a rabbit hole.
Yeah, you still haven't told us exactly what it is, though.
I'm getting there. It's quite a big rabbit hole, Tom.
Right.
So this book, S, it comes in the form of an old library book, like a hardback book, with the library card in the front and the stamps. And it looks old, like it properly looks like it's been in and out of a library since the 60s or something. So the pages are yellowing, it looks a bit worn and well thumbed. But then, as you start reading it, this old novel by a guy called V.M. Straka, you begin to notice that people have scribbled in the margins.
Yeah, and it's actually, it looks like sort of handwritten notes in the margins. And then when you look closer, you realise it's meant to be two people communicating with each other. So they're kind of leaving a note and then putting the book back in the library, and then the other one gets it out and they leave a note. And that's how they're communicating between the two of them.
Yeah. And so the whole thing, like the novel itself and the scribbles in the margin are all related, and they all add up to this big mystery about the writer of the novel and how he disappeared, and how these two people who together are trying to solve this mystery. And you, the reader, are also trying to kind of piece it all together yourself and solve it.
Yeah.
So
Do you think you solved it when you read it, or was it a bit complicated?
It's quite complicated, but I feel like I got a good kind of feeling for what actually has happened.
Right.
I'm not sure I'd fully solved it, because there's like a weird wheel in there that you're supposed to use, I think, in order to solve a problem. And I never quite figured that out.
Well, that's the other brilliant thing about it, isn't there? There is all this other stuff in there, like this paraphernalia and stuff. So there's like a crusty old postcard will fall out, or there's photographs, or like an entire newspaper article. There's one where it's like scribbled on a napkin, isn't there? It's just like really real, tangible things. Love it.
That's it. And the effect is you're completely sort of enveloped in the reality of this world. But it's such a beautifully put together thing. It's actually quite hard to explain unless you see it. It's slightly mind-blowing, but very absorbing.
It is a completely amazing thing. And now I feel like I'm getting dragged down your rabbit hole.
Welcome in.
I think we might have left something at the top of the rabbit hole previously.
What's that?
The answer to the question, the actual answer.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. Okay, yeah. What is ergodic literature?
That's a good question, that, John. We should ask that and maybe answer it.
Yeah, okay. Good idea. So ergodic literature describes any story which requires non-trivial effort for the reader to traverse the text.
Right. So basically, if I've got to do a bit of work to untangle the story or the chronology and order of it or work out what goes where, that's ergodic.
Yes, that is about the thrust of it, I think.
Right.
From what I understand.
The definition of having to put in non-trivial work to untangle it makes me think that anyone who's had the misfortune of reading one of my short stories has kind of experienced ergodic fiction by accident.
I know what you mean, Tom. It's quite accurate.
You don't necessarily need to agree with that. But anyway, go on then, let's have some more examples. Because that's the other thing about it, isn't it? Because it's more of a big sort of vibe of a genre rather than a prescriptive, this is what you're going to get. There's so many different ways that it can kind of present itself and be executed,
definitely.
Isn't there?
Okay, so well, we can go right back, Tommy, to the earliest example of ergodic literature, which is supposedly the I Ching, which is an ancient Chinese piece of writing. It's sort of like
so we are going back. We're going back.
We're going back a long, long way. Yeah, like 3,000 years or something. But it's a sort of divination text to help you read the future or kind of make sense of the world. And it functions almost a bit like if you imagine like a series of tarot cards. Yeah. It's a bit like that. I mean, that's a massive oversimplification. But there's no linear way of reading it from beginning to end. Instead, you actually have to do something like, to divine meaning from the I Ching, you have to drop a bunch of sticks to determine the number of the text you have to read.
Oh, okay.
Is basically the idea.
So, that's like rolling a die, isn't it? To choose your path through a role-playing game or something. Like you don't know where you're going to go, but it's a different route.
Yeah. Similar sort of thing.
I'll give you another one. Speaking about things in different orders, there's one we looked at, wasn't there, called The Unfortunates by B.S. Johnson.
Oh,
that was published like in the late 60s, I think. But it's kind of famous for being a book in a box. So there's 27 chapters, but they're placed in the box unordered, apart from the first and the last chapter. But all the other ones are just like randomly in there and can be done in any order.
Yeah. But apparently with that one, I think there are over 15.5 septillion possible combinations that story can be read in, which is quite a lot, isn't it? I mean, it sounds like a lot.
It does sound like a lot.
Yeah.
Do you know how much of a lot that actually is?
No, go on.
Right, brace yourself. That's many, many times more combinations than there are grains of sand on Earth.
Eh? Is that?
Yeah. Literally
right?
Every single grain of sand on Earth wouldn't even come close to how many combinations that is.
Ah. I mean, you probably get the gist after one reading, wouldn't you?
Yeah. I don't.
You don't.
I mean, I don't think I'd be going through all the different combinations.
No.
You needed like a full clear weekend for that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you would, yeah.
Yeah.
That must have been quite tricky for reviewers as well. Do you know what I mean? They're all reading a completely different book.
Yeah. Or if you got a bad review, you could just keep resubmitting it in a slightly different order. and hope it gets better. But I'll tell you what was cool about that whole idea was that the book is all the narrator's memories. So he's looking back on certain moments in his life, and it's like the narrative kind of comes to you, falls into you, the reader, in the same way that memories kind of do. So they're sort of almost, they're triggered randomly.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of, it's brilliant when you think about it, but it's another one of these that you think, God, how much work is that to actually put together? That hurts your brain just thinking about it. But yeah, it's amazing.
Hey, do you know what we should do, Tom? Or you know what we should do now?
We should talk about the chap who actually poured his blood, sweat and tears, and I think we mean that literally, into creating such a ridiculous piece of art as the book that was S.
Yes. So we caught up with Doug Dorst, who wrote S in collaboration with, believe it or not, Hollywood writer and director J.J. Abrams, who kind of came up with the concept and then essentially hired Doug to do the hard bit of actually writing it and making it good.
And when we talked to Doug, we sort of started him off first with, the same question we started this episode with, really.
Had you come across that term before you wrote S? Because I think it was coined relatively recently, wasn't it? It was like the late 90s.
Yeah, I do think it's fairly recent, but honestly, I didn't, I think, even hear the word until I read something about the book.
Right, yeah.
After it was written.
And that book, I mean, I suppose one of the one of the really interesting things is, how the hell did you get that job?
It's a good question. And honestly, I did not know the answer for a really long time. And was sort of afraid to ask.
Because I know you'd won a few awards, hadn't you, previous to...
I'd finalists, I'd gotten like mentions for things. The first novel, Alive in Necropolis, it got some nice reviews. It got a review in the Times. So there was a little bit of a push behind it. And it made the rounds for film options. And again, this is something that I found out, put together much, much later. But I think when it made the rounds for the film options, it landed at Bad Robot, JJ's production company. And the person who was, reviewing those submissions, she liked the book. And JJ had been carrying this idea around for well over a decade, I think, and just hadn't had time to pursue it. And when he did, he went to her and said, okay, I'm ready to do this. Who should we call? And again, it's the greatest stroke of luck. I mean, it's far beyond what I ever could have hoped for, that in this conversation, someone remembers the book that sold 12 copies and says, let's call this guy and see what happens. And to be honest, I got the call and I thought, well, there's no way in hell I'm going to get this. So let me put together a proposal, as they've asked me to do, and just make it the most insane, fun kind of dream project that I can think of, without regard to, no one's going to actually ask me to do this. But there's probably 25 other people competing for this, so fuck it, I might as well have fun. And they dug it. So yeah, man, I just got a phone call out of nowhere. And I know a lot of writers, and I know a lot of writers who are frankly more skilled, more accomplished, and more dedicated than I am, and none of them have had a stroke of good fortune like that.
You mean you used to have writer friends like that?
No. They're still going off and having all kinds of successes, just not of this particular size and flavor.
Yeah, no, I just think you should have been shunned from that community, purely on the basis of that phone call.
Noted. It might still happen.
It might do.
Yeah.
How did the process work then so how much of the idea had been had? How prescriptive was it, or what was the collaboration like?
It was pretty wide open. I mean, JJ had the idea of the formal structure of it, which is to say, it is a book that is the medium of communication between two readers who are passing it back and forth and interacting with the text and interacting with each other. And they pretty much said, okay, what would you do with that? What kind of story would you tell? And again, this is another stroke of good luck. I just happened at the moment to be thinking about something that fit really well. I was reading it was a nonfiction book. It was called Contested Will, I think. I mean, this is a while back, but it was all about the Shakespeare authorship controversy.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just a fun little literary rabbit hole to fall into when I was avoiding writing something else. And that's, okay, it's okay. So there's an author, a mysterious author. No one knows what his or her deal is. And in fact, in one of the last edits for the first novel, there's a tiny, tiny reference to Straka in the first novel as, some super mysterious Czech novelist.
Right.
And I was like, oh, okay, he can be that guy. And then it was pretty much, well, who would be passing a book of his back and forth? Well, I don't know, probably at least one of them's an academic, and so the pieces just kind of came together. I put together the proposal. They said, okay, let's keep talking about it. And we spent probably the better part of a year and a half, just sort of going over characters, thematic concerns, what the actual reading experience would be like. So I flew out to LA a few times, and it wasn't constant meetings, but we'd go and do a couple sessions, and I'd come home to Texas and kind of try to hammer out the idea a little more clearly and do a little proof of concept chapter that we could take out to publishers. Yeah, and then we sold it on the basis of the prologue and chapter 1 and the margin notes, which I hand wrote in because I had no idea how to do it. And, and I'm like trying to do different handwriting.
Yeah.
Like it was pretty clumsy.
I was imagining how you physically organize putting that book together. Because that must have been incredible.
It was a mess.
Was there a point when you were like, what the hell have I actually agreed to here?
Oh, yeah. It was right after we signed the contract and they gave me my deadline. Exactly.
I've actually got to do it now. Tom said when I sent the book to Tom, and he said that when he thought about the amount of time it must have taken to put it together, it actually made him feel a bit bilious. Was how he described it.
Yeah, I did. I kind of opened it and kind of, it's like, wow, look at all this. And I thought, oh my God, someone's done this. Oh my God. What? There must have been points where your brain was just absolute mush.
Oh God,
and you were going round in weird circles and thinking, well, what's real and what's not real? And did I say that, or what was that going?
Honestly, I think it was even deeper than that. Like it wasn't even necessarily revolving around the text. But at the time, I was still teaching a full load. I had a year and a half to finish the draft. I was teaching a full load. We just had a baby, and my wife was finishing her dissertation. So I was pulling like 2, 3, 4 all-nighters a week, and I was completely insane and dysfunctional by the end of it. And at the risk of being melodramatic, there were many occasions of like 3 a.m. kind of tears and panic and resignation.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, but I mean, and part of that was just, I wasn't getting any sleep. So, I wasn't I wasn't in any position to be well adjusted about the usual anxieties.
Yeah.
And it did kind of fuck me up a little bit, which is to say my body kind of forgot how to sleep. And I acquired a series of sleep disorders that I've only recently discovered and am trying to work my way back out of. But it all kind of dates back to then.
Wow.
And I'm not trying to say like, oh, poor me, but it was just like, well, it was a great opportunity. I did what I needed to do to fulfill it as well as I could and make the thing that I wanted. And there was a cost. And okay, that's just how some things go.
If I can be honest with you, Doug, you've not made me feel any less bilious. If anything.
Oh, shit. I'm sorry.
Anything that's made it all a little bit worse. That sounds horrendous.
A lot of that makes sense, Doug, because some of that book has a kind of hallucinatory quality.
Yeah, sort of a manicness in the medical sense.
And there's a lot of sort of dream type sequences in there. You're not never quite sure what's real and what's not. And that weirdly makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think I did sort of recognize that as miserable as I was in one way with that, it was actually helping with the compositional part of it.
Yeah, I can see that.
That almost makes it worse, though, doesn't it? Because then it becomes a necessitous part of the process.
Yeah.
The pain becomes needed.
I need less sleep in order to write this chapter.
I mean, it was a headspace that I don't know that I'll ever be able to get into again.
What about the fun bit of it, though? The fun bit must have been coming up with all the bits and bobs, all the materials that were in there. That must have been great to do.
Yeah.
I love stuff like that.
They weren't a huge part of the compositional process. It was more, we knew we were going to do it, and JJ just told me to keep a wish list of every random and cool thing I would think of to put in it.
Yeah.
And he said, and don't worry about whether it's practical or even possible, or just make the list. And then when you're done, we'll go over it and figure out which ones make sense. And I think within minutes, we had it down to the 20 or 21 or 22 pieces that felt like they would, be possible.
Yeah.
Because like we're not going to include a handgun with the book, for example.
What was the most ridiculous thing that got declined?
Okay, I didn't actually propose a handgun. I did propose a big old chunk of obsidian.
That would have been cool.
Like just like a rock. I mean, okay, it was 3 a.m. and it just seemed like, okay, why not a rock? Oh, actually, I know why. I'm dating myself here, but did you guys ever play those text-based adventure games?
The
Infocom games. It was long before
like on computers,
like The Hobbit and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was this one company that did just pure text, but they would include a bunch of cool stuff in the package. And I remember there was one that had like a magic glowing rock with it. It served no purpose in the story, but I just loved that it was glow in the dark and it came with it and I could have it on the desk next to me. I think I was thinking of that. And I've seen a photo of JJ wearing a T-shirt from the company that made all of those. So I'm assuming that he was
also a fan.
Yeah, I mean, I've never asked, but yeah.
I have to say that was one of the things that ruined the book for me was the lack of loose aggregate stone in it. Anything, a bit of flint or anything, granite, anything would have really helped.
Would have been cool.
Yeah, it was very much lacking in the rock department.
I think I had a blood-stained rag also. Right. Although I guess it wouldn't have to be real blood, but it would have to be real rag.
Wow.
Yeah, coming back to the ergodic thing.
Yeah.
Is that something you enjoy reading yourself?
I like stuff like that. I don't necessarily always seek it out, but I would include in that the act of just assembling a narrative in collage, like reading something that's in fragments and having my own experience of putting them together in a certain way.
Yeah.
And so it's not really a puzzle, but it's still, more participatory than a straight narrative.
More interactive, yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned the adventure games on computer because they're obviously very similar to that. And I suppose one of the earliest examples of ergodic fiction is the Choose Your Own Adventure books. That's very much that kind of thing, isn't it?
And I was crazy about those when I was a kid. I mean, I don't know how many they made, but I must have had like 50 of them.
It's the thrill of that kind of leaving your thumb in that bit there, and moving your finger over so you can look at page 87. No, I'm not going there. What was the other option? That's the right.
So yeah, I mean, I love that stuff.
I actually wrote one of those when I was a kid. I must have been reading them, and I remember, it was some murder at a hotel or something. It was all done it was all like on A4 paper. So in a way, Doug, I feel that the anxiety and the stress and the thought process you had to go through to produce S on a smaller scale, maybe.
I get it. I totally get it.
Are you familiar with a book I'm reading at the moment? It's called House of Leaves. That's a famous one. That's also amazingly clever. The people at my local bookshop, called it a project book, and I can see what they mean now because it's literally and metaphorically a labyrinth. To the extent where sometimes, you'll know this if you read it, but sometimes you have to turn the book upside down in order to read it, and you actually, at moments, you're completely disorientated and like panicky, like you've just completely lost your way. It's just such a brilliant idea.
I confess I haven't read it, and I will one of these days, but I did have a moment, maybe about a month or two shy of the deadline, where I had just an absolute meltdown. And I called my editor and I said, "Oh, Jesus, am I making House of Leaves? Like, is this all just done?"
Oh, no. Yeah.
Like, I was fully panicking. And he said, "Relax. Don't go and read it. I'll tell you if you get too close to it."
I'm guessing, judging by the way you're talking, Doug, I'm guessing you've never been tempted to have another go at a similar kind of book. Maybe not as difficult and involved as S, but something that's of that kind of form.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if we define that kind of form as something where, there's some sort of interesting form or structure or fragmenting of the narrative, I think that's where this all comes together. Like, I'm a puzzle guy. I like participating in literature. And so anything that is, I mean, I have no quarrel with like linear narrative, right?
Yeah.
Like it's great and it's what we're used to. And I particularly like messing with that and seeing what kinds of narratives emerge when you forego linearity. Like, where does that take you? Which is another way in which I got lucky as hell that S fell into my lap, because I got a phone call from someone representing one of the most famous people on earth saying, "Would you like to work together? And here is a formal challenge. Think of a story that would work like this." That's my dream, like on every level. So yeah, I think the stuff that I've been working on since then, there are nothing as complicated as S, but I'm always looking for fun little ways to fragment or augment or screw with linearity.
What are you working on at the moment? Are you writing at the moment, or are you mainly kind of doing your teaching? Because I know you do a bit of that as well.
I'm working on a novel. It's sort of taken a little while for me to connect with the characters in the way that I feel like I need to in order to, make progress that's worthwhile. But it's coming together, and quite a bit of linearity to it, but there are also a lot of different text sources in it. So there is a little bit of that kind of collage.
And are you like a deep planner, or do you like to kind of fly by the seat of your pants a little bit? How do you work normally?
I need to fly by the seat of my pants a little bit. The ideal for me is to have some sense of what things are, generally about, and some sense of a few incidents that might happen. I do need to have a pretty firm grasp on character. But you're up in the air and you have no idea how it's going to come down.
Yeah. I think that's a nice way to do it. Yeah. Like the very end, you've got an idea of where you want to get to, but not the specifics of it.
Yeah.
You know what rocks you want to put in there, but you haven't decided exactly what kind of rock.
Exactly.
Just a little bit of gravel on the last page.
Yeah. So there you go. That's nice to hear that he had a horrific, mind-melting time writing that book, isn't it? That's good to hear. Although it doesn't seem to do it justice just calling it a book.
No, because it's something else, isn't it?
I had to write a pretend book to be able to do the whole book.
Yeah, it does not surprise me at all that it took its toll. There's so much going on in that. There's just so many strands to it. And I'm not sure, like I was saying before, I'm not entirely sure I understood all of it still after reading it. So
no, I would agree with that, definitely not. But it feels like a unique experience, doesn't it? And it does feel like an actual experience.
Yeah. I think that's the appeal, isn't it? It's that complete absorption into that world. Like you actually become part of it. You're a sort of a moving part of the story, or you definitely feel like it anyway.
Yeah, and to be fair, the other side of the coin is, and I know I have this as one of my non-negotiable life rules personally, if one of the biggest movie producers and writers of all time phones you up and tells you you're working on a project with him, you just say yes, don't you? So you haven't really got to...
Yeah, I think that's probably true, yeah.
Oh, apart from that time Spielberg kept pestering me about doing that thing with him. Oh.
Leave it alone, Spielberg.
He embarrassed himself, didn't he? But I was just too busy, wasn't I, with stuff? So
yeah, you've got all the stuff, haven't you? You've got all the stuff to do.
I hope he got it sorted in the end. I'm sure he did.
I'm sure he did.
He will.
Sure he did, Tom.
Now, earlier at the start, we were talking about choose your own adventure books, as I'm sure you remember fondly, and how I didn't even realise they were ergodic fiction. I mean, to be fair to me, why would I? I was 11 years old at the time. That would be quite a precocious child to go, oh, mother, I'm just going to go and read some ergodic fiction. But we thought it'd be interesting to have a chat with someone who's kind of brought that genre back to life. I think
yes, yeah. So Deb Potter is the driving force behind the You Say Which Way series, which really captures the magic of those old choose your own adventure books. So as a part of our quest to have a little delve into the world of ergodicism, we called her for a chat.
Deb Potter, thank you very much for joining us. The reason we wanted to speak to you is because you have reignited one of the most exciting literary concepts of our childhood.
Yes, definitely.
Choose your own adventure style. But now I want to ask you about this, actually. What do you call it?
You Say Which Way, isn't it?
Yeah, my brand's called You Say Which Way. Choose your own adventure is trademarked. So
yes, that's what I assume, because it's funny, isn't it? Because it seems like such a normal phrase to say, that's what that kind of thing is, and then you realise it's someone else's like trademark and idea.
Yeah, that's right. It's particularly for older readers, but it's interesting that in New Zealand there's a whole cohort of children who are wandering around calling it You Say Which Way, which is quite nice.
Yeah. So what was the spark to get that started? Were you a massive fan of them from your childhood?
I did read some interactive fiction when I was a kid and liked it. And I don't think that I particularly had a word for it. I think I came across fighting fantasy as well and thought that was pretty cool. But really, I started reading ebooks, when the first sort of Kindles came out, and I was watching my youngest daughter navigating around on a Kindle, and I just had this sort of epiphany that you could use hyperlinks and it would be really fun. Thought back to those, and I sort of imagined that kids would be reading on Kindles rather than paperbacks, sort of in the future, because I'm always thinking, right, everyone's leaping into the future. In actual fact, kids do tend to read paperback, You Say Which Way, is more than ebooks.
Right.
But initially, we were totally writing for ebook experience with lots of hyperlinks and all sorts of things around the place.
Oh, so that's interesting. So you weren't kind of harking back. You were looking forward and trying to. It was like a evolution of the whole thing that's then eventually kind of gone back to actual books.
Yeah, that's totally right. In fact, the first couple of years that we were producing stories, my stories, and then other people came on board, I only did ebooks, which was quite good because that meant that I could go back and edit them as I was reading them in schools and realising, oh, this is too long, this doesn't work, oh, I'm boring myself now, I'm hurrying the story along, so that must mean it needs to be cut back, that kind of thing.
I just have images of you in like a class assembly. Give me 20 minutes, kids. I'm going to be back, okay? And quickly editing that bit. Get rid of that. I don't need the dragon. Get rid of that. Kids, I'm back.
When you're in front of a class, teachers ring up and say, can you come out and talk to the class about interactive fiction and can you read to them? And then slowly they usually build up and say, oh, could it be a 2-hour workshop? Oh, could we actually have 3 classes at once? and initially, you're just so excited that anyone's even heard of you that you're sort of quite agreeable. And so you end up, with an assembly hall and you've got to hold their attention. So interactive fiction is actually quite good for that because you can get half of one group to vote one way and vote another way and someone to stand up and say why they made their choice. You can actually involve them.
Yeah.
But you do edit on the fly quite quickly just to kind of keep things going.
I think in this day and age as well, those books they're good for short attention spans, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. What they call the reluctant readers, can get some satisfaction because they've got to an end.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then other readers will tell you, I found all the endings.
What have you found as some sort of truths of writing these now that you've done quite a few of them in terms of, I don't know, when you started, were they quite simple and they've got more complicated, or you should have so many paths, or you shouldn't do this? What are the do's and don'ts?
So I probably did what a lot of people do when they're thinking about writing a genre, and that's I went back and I reread a lot of Choose Your Own Adventures, Fighting Fantasies, Pick a Path. And because I am a statistician and I'm a little bit kind of geeky,
right.
I started kind of annotating things like good choices. I was colour coding stuff. I was kind of writing my own flow charts of stories, that kind of thing. One thing that struck me about the stories from the 80s was that it was often implied that the character was a male, and more than often it seemed to be implied that they were a white male, or we'd call it here Pākehā male. So I was interested in doing something different and being gender neutral. I guess I got kind of inspired, oh, well, these actually could go forward. I don't have to replicate the past. But that kind of made me critically aware doing that reading about kind of what some of the do's and don'ts are. And I think a big one is having real dilemma type choices in them. So where you really kind of think to yourself, but something equally appealing or equally unappealing to move you forward, as opposed to will you turn left or right, which is just moving you around. And while kids can often map things in their heads a lot better than adults do because they've got better memory, they're looking for that kind of dilemma and immersion so that they're sort of feeling that kind of vicarious pleasure of adventure in lives that are now today, quite cotton-wooled. So
do you think you see a link in your writing with that then? Kids used to be out on the bikes from dawn till dusk, and now they're not. They're a bit more helicopter parented, and these stories are a bit of an escape and a chance to actually do something risky.
Yeah, I mean, it might be something that wasn't thought about so much when people were writing them in the 80s and 90s, but now I think getting that opportunity to explore safely is probably more important than it was back then.
Yeah. One thing that strikes me, I was reading through my old Choose Your Own Adventure books yesterday, and it's interesting because as a writer, it's an interesting problem because you want to obviously create an interesting narrative, one that has a sort of a slow reveal of mystery and character progression and what have you, but you're kind of restricted by the path someone takes, aren't you? Do you know what I mean? You can't write everything into every single pathway. So do you think you have to kind of sacrifice a little bit of the art of storytelling in order to make it interactive? Or can you completely combine them?
Well, I think you can combine them. If you think of picture books that kids have, think of some, where you've got kind of 16 pages and you get to know a character like Curious George, for instance. There's an awful lot that can come through there in 16 pages, and a lot of it, I think, is the closeness that a child feels to a character. So when you first start writing something like interactive fiction, like traditionally you're writing in second person.
Yeah.
So I think there's devices that you use to try and bring the character of you in. So it's you're experiencing it, but still you can produce some inner narrative and reaction to things. You know, you can feel fear and surprise and all of those sorts of things. And the description is just a little bit closer, you know, because you're the one who's feeling it. And because you are faced with dilemmas, there's a character arc. You're going to grow from that and learn from it. And particularly if you supply a bunch of dilemmas in a row, you can learn from a previous experience and then apply that, or you can be acquiring things, skills, tools, whatever, relationships, and moving it along. So I guess I'd argue that you can do that. But some people find second person a very kind of cold style to write in.
The old Choose Your Own Adventure books used to have, as a kind of brag on the front cover, they used to say, name the number of endings, 25 possible endings or 40 possible endings.
Yeah.
Can you beat that in terms of numbers of endings? That's clearly a very important thing because it says it in big letters on the front.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a marketing technique. So initially I used to, in every single book, I would have at least one time when you were eaten by or killed by a giant squid, just because, you know, I come from New Zealand and that's something you imagine as a child that's going to happen to you, you know, potentially to look out for. So I tend to think of, you know, fun, dumb ways to die, that if you make the wrong choices, obviously wrong choices, because I discovered early on reading to kids that they really enjoy dying, you know, in fun ways.
Yeah. Very often in those books, I used to find that the careful choice, like if you decided not to go into the room, that was when you died, which I quite like that. It's like you were almost encouraged to be a bit more curious.
Yeah. But if you're also making like mean choices, or, you know, I think kids they like a bit of karma, you know, to happen.
Yeah. If you're being selfish, you're looking after yourself, then it's not good. That's not going to end well.
I was going to say, kind of linked to that, Deb, I'd be interested to know your thoughts as a creator of this genre on readers that keep their thumb in the previous decision. So is that something?
Or the three previous.
Yeah. They've got like fingers going all through the things. Go, I didn't really choose that. I'm going to go back. You know, what are your views on that? Is that acceptable, or is that cheating? Or
it's absolutely acceptable. It's definitely an acceptable way to read it. Kids tell me all the time that that's something that they do, but they also they'll send in pictures because they've drawn the different pathways. And I think that's the thing, is because these days kids kind of know about programming, they think about flowcharts. So they'll draw things and they'll draw their pivot points and stuff like that. And sometimes they'll then draw, and I've seen classes do this where they've kind of drawn out where they've gone, but then they'll put in their own choices and draw some more story. Or write some more story themselves, which is cool.
That is cool.
Because you pick those all up at the end of the lesson, and that's your next book.
And edit the book on the fly. Yeah.
Usually when I go along to a class, I usually talk about something I am writing, and I'll read something from that, and then I'll get some ideas. They'll throw some ideas in about different types of dilemmas too, and those are often really inspiring. And this is the kind of genre that really lends itself to, if somebody just suddenly gives you a list like a red frog, a blueberry, a dark and stormy night, a guy with a microphone, throw it all in. You'll be able to do it because you can go off in so many directions.
Have you ever kind of messed with the rules a little bit? Kind of messed around with the form in an unusual way?
Yeah, we put Easter eggs in. I think that's kind of fun, like putting in something about the writer being trapped in a room, and you can kind of put that in the middle. And there's no way to get to it. They'd have to rifle through the pages to find it.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and that's a good way to put in some kind of blurb about the writer, but do it in a funny way. And then stories within stories, you know, books that fall out of bookshelves that just give you totally unrelated stories, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think it's the same as any genre, where you need to be really aware of what the kind of the main joy points and the kind of the unwritten promises that there are to the reader, and make sure that you fulfill them. You've got to do that, otherwise they're disappointed and not going to want another story, another book. And that's really important.
Can't just send them into a loop.
Well, it's super important with middle grade, because the reader doesn't have any money. They don't have the agency to get the book, So it's really imperative that they have a good time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So you can't frustrate them too much, but certainly being a little bit frustrated is part of what you're supposed to deliver.
Yeah.
What's the most fun part of putting a book together?
Writing the deaths. So because when I started, so earlier on you asked me, how many endings. So when I started off, I thought to myself just on my own that I might write 5 or 10 of these, because when I wrote the first one, I thought, I've written a lot of other genres, but when I started writing these, I was genuinely having a lot of fun. And I was even kind of dreaming my stories at night, because your setting's really important, right? Because your character is a little bit opaque. You don't really see your character, but you're sort of seeing through their eyes a lot more, I find, as a writer. So I was having kind of lucid dreams of different things that I've written. I was enjoying doing this and putting the books out, and then surprise, they were selling. So other writers sort of came along and said, hey, looks like you're having fun writing these. They seem like fun. Can we write too? And I thought, actually, that's totally a thing that you can do with middle grade fiction. There's a great tradition that there's multiple authors who are writing next. Or Trixie Belden, or, whatever it is. So I was, come on in, the order's fine. And thinking up concepts, which that's something I really like doing. So at the moment, I'm writing one called Alien Zoo, where you get transported into an alien zoo, which is a lot of fun. So people were writing their manuscripts, and then when I was editing those stories, I was reading them for the pace and thinking about when I felt that you needed to add an extra choice in. By the time someone's ever sent you the manuscript, they've usually had it. So they're like, if you're publishing them, you can probably do what you like to the manuscript because you are publishing, which means that you can add branches and more deaths. So that's kind of where
again with the deaths.
I'm going to put in about 16 more endings to this, and they'll all be fun ways to die, and I get to dream them up. And I love it when I meet a kid and they go, my favourite way that I died in your book was.
So back to John's point earlier about, so on the front you need like 15 endings. 9 of them deaths. Horrific. That's what you want to be pushing. Yeah.
I guess so.
Just to jump back on the Alien Zoo one, is that a zoo run by aliens or a zoo that has aliens?
You're in the zoo, you're an exhibit.
Yeah, right,
and
cool.
And there's different aliens visiting the zoo and different aliens in the zoo. So you're going to need to crack the mystery of why some are behind bars, including you, and move on, and why some get to be on the other side.
Yeah.
I always like to have a mystery kind of thread. You can put different genres into your interactive fiction.
Ever done a romance? I suppose it's not really middle grade, is it, romance?
I very slightly have a romance. This is going to sound bad for a middle grade, but it's done in a tasteful way, as interactive fiction can be. But you go into the brain of a dolphin, and did you know that dolphins actually have 2 sides of their brain, and one is always awake, so they never sleep. Yeah. So there's you, and then it turns out also the dolphin's consciousness, because of that 2-brain thing. They didn't get it quite right. So you get to have a conversation with the dolphin in your brain when you go down into this water planet that you are exploring, and there's another dolphin. And so big spoilers if you're going to read Between the Stars, but in one of the endings, you and the other dolphins stay on that planet making friends with the other water creatures, and there are other little dolphins that happen, so you have to join the dots there. But I guess there was a romance.
Getting frisky with the dolphins.
And it's nice, isn't it, when the 11-year-olds come up to you in school and say, I think the dolphin sex was the favourite bit of the book. It's just nice to get the feedback, isn't it? Well, Deb, thank you so much for your time. I think probably a big thank you from an awful lot of our listeners that grew up in sort of the 80s for bringing back the choose your own adventure style books, because it's definitely something that has a real soft spot in people's hearts. So yeah, I think thank you for bringing it back.
Absolutely my pleasure. And nice to meet you guys.
You too, Deb. You too. She bloody loves writing the deaths, doesn't she?
She does, but I can see why that would be fun. Why the kids like it too. It's the kind of thing the kids love, don't they?
I mean, clearly not as much as the dolphin sex, obviously, but
Obviously.
So, Thomas, having talked to a couple of people who have written some ergodic literature, do you reckon, is this a bad idea? Do you think it's time that we tried our arm at it, had a little go? What do you reckon?
Why not? We should really.
Surely
Maybe we should turn it into a ergodic podcast.
Oh, yeah, we should. So what our listeners choose at this point, whether we have a go or not, you mean?
Yeah.
All right. So, listeners, do you want us to have a go at something ergodic, or would you rather we just moved on because it will inevitably be rubbish?
Okay, just give them a bit of thinking time. Just have a think about it.
Is that what they're doing now?
Yeah.
It's obviously quite a tough choice, isn't it?
Well, it will be. I mean, they know it's going to be terrible, but they're just weighing up whether it's going to be so terrible that it'll be funny, or whether it will just be terrible with no redeeming qualities. So,
hang on, Tom. Looks like they're about to choose. Whoa, they want to hear what we've got. Wow, was not expecting that.
Right. Well, so we thought it'd be fun to set ourselves a little task and to see if we could come up with an ergodic concept.
Yeah, I think just the concept, though. I think that's probably fair, isn't it? Because if Doug's trials and tribulations in writing S are anything to go by, I think maybe actually doing one for real might drive us mad.
Yeah.
So let's not do the full thing.
I kind of actually have done mine.
Really?
I did. Well, yeah, in a way. It didn't really turn out like I meant it to. So I can tell you my original idea, and then, although I think it'd be incredibly boring for everyone listening, you can have a go at what I ended up with, I guess, as well, because I've spent far too long doing it for some reason. It seemed like a good idea at the time.
I'm intrigued, Tommy. So, all right, so give me your original idea. You said it didn't turn out as planned. What?
No, my original idea was to do a poem that's ergodic.
Oh, right.
And it would be really clever. And in the start of the poem, you would have to pick a side or a sound. So it might give you in a very cleverly poetic written way. So you might have to choose a P or a D, and then there would be substitutions in the next verse.
Oh, that's
so it could
nice.
be pink or drink, which would alter the meaning.
Yeah.
So you'd sort of fall through the poem making these choices, and depending which one you chose at the start of each verse.
Did it work?
Yeah. It didn't. Well, I don't know what happened, because what I've ended up with is a poem that is a choose your own adventure.
Oh, God. Brilliant.
So
how are we going to do this then?
Well, you're going to do it live.
Okay, brilliant.
I'm going to read it to you, and you're going to make the choices. Amazing. And then we're going to decide afterwards whether this has been far too boring to broadcast.
Whether she just
we might put it just right at the end of the podcast.
And get people to flick to page 47, like you said.
If they want to listen to it, they can, flick to the end. So you ready?
Very much so.
Welcome to this, my ergodic verse. A tale of choices for better or worse. Your quest is to make it safely to the, I don't know, what would it be in something like this? A castle. But I'll be honest with you, adventurer, getting there is going to be a hassle. So a simple decision to get things going, guess left or right. You have no way of knowing.
I mean, left every time, innit?
You've made a sinister choice and perhaps not the best. It's unlucky to meet a monster this early in your quest. It's greasy and warty and has never had a bath, 9 foot tall, and it's stood blocking your path. You going to sneak up and attack him unarmed? Or try and talk him round using your natural charm?
I mean, it's charm every time, isn't it, Tom? Obviously.
Okay. Off we go to page 5. Turns out the monster is a really nice chap. It's only a shame he can't stay longer and chat. Go through the pits of doom, he suggests, or over the mountain to continue your quest. So what's it to be? Which way for you? The mountain path or the pits of doom?
The pits of doom sound fun, don't they? Let's go
Seriously?
Is it going to end very quickly?
You're now in the pits of doom and it stinks of poo. These toxic gases are going to be the end of you. So do you rush across the quicker narrow path between or take the safer long route through the poisonous steam? What are you going to do? Try balance across or take the long route around the noxious bogs?
Oh, you got to just run through.
You go and run through?
Yeah, you got to run over that little bridge.
So you chose to try and walk across the pits of doom. I mean, the clue's in the name, you silly goon. So across you go, but then one foot slips, then the other, and before you know it, you're arse over tit. You've become muddy mush. No trace will be found. Your quest has failed, and you're now just soupy ground.
Oh, that's good. That's a lot of fun.
It took bloody hours and hours and hours.
How many options are there? How many does it branch out into?
There's quite a lot of different ones.
It's brilliant.
I just got so into it I couldn't stop.
What was brilliant about that, Tom, was as you were reading it, I was seeing the illustrations, like the old Choose Your Own Adventure.
Yeah.
I was seeing them. Oh, I love it. That's so good.
That was fun. What have you got up your sleeve?
I didn't get close to actually doing it, but to be fair...
No, absolutely, which is completely the sensible thing to do. I spent an inordinate amount of time doing that.
Yeah, so my idea, ergodic literature does this quite a lot where the story kind of crosses into the real world, like S.
Yeah.
You've got like an object which is, suppose... a sort of a kind of literary version of found footage.
Yeah.
And I love stuff like that. Like in film, you've got like Blair Witch or The Connection, that 60s film, and it's like you've come across something real. But with books, the idea of found footage is sort of even cooler because you're
literally holding it in your hand.
have the object. Yeah, that's it. And that thing is sort of the portal, like the conduit to the narrative. And there's a term for that sort of general idea too, where a character or the narrator intrudes into the reader's world. It's called narrative metalepsis, apparently.
Oh, that's nice.
I read this quite
I like
recently.
that.
It is. It's a nice word, isn't it? But
Say it again.
Narrative metalepsis. And it's when you get that brilliant sort of stepping out of the book feeling. But one sort of really exciting way of doing that is to have the actual item itself, the thing that has been found, like S. So you're almost like a voyeur looking into someone else's real life story. So my idea, which I really want to pitch to a publisher because I honestly think it'd be quite cool, but it comes in the form of a shoebox, and it comes like pre-covered in dust, and it's a shoebox that's found in an attic. I haven't quite worked out what the story is yet, but it's this old box. And you know how people collect their little important things in a shoebox and then hide them away. So this shoebox is just kind of full of stuff that someone's put together. It's got like a bundle of letters and an old diary. There's a couple of photos in there. There's maybe a little toy car, maybe a business card, and also a lanyard for getting into some building. And you've got to use all the things in the box to piece together this mysterious death and maybe like a larger conspiracy. And when you figure it all out, you have to use the lanyard to go to an actual building somewhere in the UK and let yourself in using the little electronic thingy. And then you have to go up and tell the person.
And you get murdered.
Yeah, and that's it.
Wow.
That's the end. So it's quite visceral. No, you have to go up and tell the person at the desk or whoever who the murderer was.
And you've employed this person full time just to stay at this desk?
No, I'm thinking what you do is just use the publishing company.
Yeah, good thinking. You've thought about this.
Use their headquarters. So if you go up and you say correctly who the murderer was, and the first 10 people to crack it get some sort of cool prize related to the story.
I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot.
It'd be quite good, that, wouldn't it? But obviously all the things kind of tell you something, like the photos, they've got maybe something in the background that gives you a little clue, so you're using all the stuff in the box to piece together this mystery. I mean, again, it would be a nightmare. I was thinking of calling Doug and getting him to write it.
I'm not sure he'd be up for that.
I think you're probably right. Also, because I'm not J.J. Abrams as well.
Yeah, I think there's an element of you maybe don't have the weight to ask. But, I mean, you could ask him, couldn't you? But I think...
But that would be such a cool present, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It'd be such an ace thing.
That reminds me a bit of... well, actually, it reminds me very much of there's a kid's box you can get that's got a story in it. That's in like a shoebox type thing.
Oh, yeah.
And it's got loads of bits and pieces of paraphernalia, and it teaches little magic tricks, and you have to work out what's happened to who. There's not much of a book with it. It's more of a kind of thing like that. But it also reminds me of, there was a book, I think I mentioned this ages ago on the podcast. There was a book called Masquerade in the 70s, early 80s. And it was like these kind of whimsical, folksy cartoon drawings, but the entire book was a treasure hunt. And they'd literally buried something somewhere in England.
I think you did mention that, yeah.
And you had to try and figure out from the thing. But then you could actually go there and find the jewels or whatever they did. And it was full of like clues and
was there actually something to find? It was like it was an actual jewel or something.
Yeah.
Cool. And did everything get found?
I think it did. Yeah, I'm sure there was some toing and froings and issues with it and scandals. But yeah,
brilliant.
Yeah, but very much obviously. So, yeah, that's got to be Ergodic, hasn't it? Yeah,
that is.
Playing a part in it. Playing a part.
Yeah.
So I think it's fair to say we've learnt that Ergodic fiction is like a massive broad umbrella for all kinds of literature, but it's all got that one quality, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's that idea that the reader themselves are a part of the piece. They're like an integral part of the story structure, and they've got to do, they've got to bring themselves to it, do a bit of work to keep things moving along.
And it's interesting thinking about this as well. They've tried it on TV. I don't know if you've seen any of the stuff on Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
Where you can choose which way the story. It was like a Black Mirror one. I think there was a Bear Grylls one as well.
All right.
But I don't think it's not really kind of, obviously you can do it on it.
Yeah,
but it
it's not
doesn't seem
quite
to
caught on.
No, not on that medium. I don't know if
do you think TV is quite different to reading a book, I think, for that, isn't it?
I think, for expecting people to put the effort in. I think with TV there's an element if you just want to be sat and entertained by moving images.
Yeah, maybe.
Rather than actually putting the effort in. Whereas having a book and reading a book, you are a bit more involved with it. You're a bit more. You're physically turning the pages. You you've got it in your hands. You're less of a passenger.
You're doing half the imagining.
Yeah.
It's amazing as well when it's done right, when it's done well. It can be mind blowing. I think.
Yeah, it really, really can. So do you think you'll be delving into more Ergodic fiction yourself then? Part of your reading list?
Yeah, I think so. Although quite a lot of it does seem like it's quite big commitment reading, isn't it? If you know what I mean.
Yeah. You can't dip in and out of it very easily. It is kind of quite involved, isn't it, by its very nature? But then the other side of that coin is that's where you get the satisfaction from, isn't it?
Yeah.
You kind of get the big payoff because you've been in it and part of it.
That's it. Exactly.
Well, there you go. That's it for another amazing episode of the Failing Writers podcast. Hope you've all enjoyed it.
Yes. And if you haven't enjoyed it, can you just go back to page 1 and maybe try a different route?
Yeah, that's how it works, isn't it?
Good work.
Yeah, just keep your thumb in there so you know which way you've gone and pick a better one. But until next time, obviously remember to like, follow, subscribe, tell friends, enemies, acquaintances, family, estranged family, and that bloke with the weird eyebrows who works down the corner shop. Tell them all to have a listen to the podcast. That'd be nice.
Yes, that would be lovely. I mean, there's got to be an episode that everyone can recommend to someone. Hasn't there? We've got a big old backlist.
Well, we've done episodes about loads of stuff, haven't we? Brontes, poetry, flash fiction, writing retreats the other week. Millions of great guests.
And now Ergodic fiction.
Yeah, no one knows what that is, though. So
they do now, Tommy, don't they?
They do. It makes you wonder what we're going to come up with next, doesn't it?
It does. Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do next, Tommy. What we're going to do next is incredibly exciting because next episode, we're going to launch our annual flash fiction competition.
Oh, yeah. £500 first prize again, sponsored by Scrivener. So that is not to be missed.
Yeah, so definitely tune in next time for that and for all the details that you need to know, including that sneaky secret phrase you need to include in your submission.
Yes, yeah, definitely. So right, we will see you then. See you next time.
Yeah, take care.
It leaves you pleased or leaves you dyspeptic. When the story you weave is narrative metalepsis. Have you got to work at it or does it just flow? Automatically knowing just where to go. Or does the story just floor you so you just never know? Does it explain or decline to show? You either haven't or you have got it. Your fiction is standard or it's Ergodic. Are you lost in the plot, or is the plot all you got? Or is a lot of it what makes you tie yourself in a knot?
John, do you want another go at that?
Yeah, please.
Should we have another go? Right.
Yeah, let's do one more.
If you were bored of it the first time, just pretend the episode's ended there. But anyway, so welcome to my blah 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 blah. Left or right?
I'm going to go left again.
Are you? Is that what you're going to do?
Yeah.
Okay. You've made a sinister choice and perhaps not the best. It's unlucky to meet a monster this early in your quest. It's greasy and warty and has never had a bath, 9 foot tall, and it stood blocking your path. You're going to sneak up and attack
Fight it.
You're going to sneak up and attack him unarmed.
Yeah.
Sorry, just before your inevitable demise, let's get this right. You thought you could beat a monster in a fist fight. Well, as you may have gathered, you're about to get completely hammered. He tosses you and jiggles you like a cat with its prey, and you end up in a mushy pile of human remains.
I had a funny feeling that might happen.
Negotiating that the first time.
That was for the listeners to make it end quicker.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks.
No, I'll go right.
So you choose right and chose your own adventure, but we can't call it that for legal reasons, remember. You'll find yourself in the middle of a forest. It's all a little bit spooky, to be perfectly honest. From a clearing, you can hear witches chant and wail. Do you investigate or continue on the wooded trail?
I mean, in real life, I've probably just hit that trail, but I've always wanted to meet a witch. So I think I'll go witches because it's sort of safe, isn't it? It's a safe place to meet a witch.
That's good, right? The witch is greeting you with open arms. Probably not all that spell casting and strange charms. Incantations that leave you feeling as woozy and sick as writing a Hollywood bigwig's Ergodic epic. So what you gonna do? You're feeling dizzy, and that's no fun. You gonna try and fight or try to run?
I mean, have I got any weaponry on me? I know I'm not supposed to ask questions.
It's just you. Well, you're taking the Ergodic thing to the next step. I like that. It's the ultimate in interaction.
I feel like I'm screwed either way. I'm going to run.
You're gonna run.
I don't mind being a coward.
You're as weak as a failing writer's excuses to fail. You managed to crawl under a hedge and onto a long trail. You've just missed a coach. Unlucky for you, mate. That might have taken you straight to the castle gate. But in the nearby field, you spy a cow. You could ride that heifer. I guess your only other choice is to walk on for what seems like forever.
Oh, yeah, I'll ride. I've never ridden a cow before. I'll do that.
Oh, dear. I think we all know what's going to happen now. Did you honestly think you could ride a cow? The cow is startled, as any beast would be, when someone jumped on them shouting, "Yippee!" The cow bucks and flings you off with a powerful flick, landing you fatally on the fence, like a cocktail sausage on a cocktail stick. Wow, you managed to die like 4 times.
I know, That's doing quite well.
Quite impressive,
yeah.
Quite impressive. Well, there we go. We've learned a lot about Ergodic fiction, haven't we?
And I still haven't got to that bloody castle.
No, I don't. The way you negotiate your way through there, I don't think you can manage it unless you got your thumb in the pay.
No, exactly. You've got to nip back occasionally, haven't you?
Bad choices. But yeah. Right, that really is the end now.
Yeah, the proper end. See you later, Tommy. See you later, everybody.
See you next time.
I've got one last question before you go.
Yeah.
This author won Jeopardy 3 times.
Yeah, I did that.
Oh, Doug, you should have phrased your answer in the form of a question.
Come on.
on.
See, I'm retired. I can't even, who is me? Who am I?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hello?
Where's everybody gone?